Hi, everyone. We're going to record today for September 26th. This is the meeting of the Iamblichus Reading Group, and Varjana and Ryan are on. And we're going to go ahead and work on what we talked about, some of what we talked about last time. We did discuss about the um, hierarchy of the gods, the daemons, the heroes, and then the souls. What I wanted to take a specific look at is a really interesting paragraph, and I think it kind of sums up, at least it gives one of the basic assumptions that we have Iamblichus making. And if you don't accept this assumption, then I think it begins to get really hard to accept some of the other things that he says. And this, I mentioned this paragraph last time before we broke up, but it's the third to last paragraph in chapter 5. I can read it. The classes of being then bring to completion as intermediaries the common bond that connects gods with souls and causes their linkage to be indissoluble. They bind together a single continuity from top to bottom, and render the communion of all things indivisible. They constitute the best possible blending and proportionate mixture for everything, contriving in pretty well equal measure a progression from the superior to the lesser, and a reascent from the inferior to the prior. They implant order and measure into the participation, descending from the better and the receptivity engendered in less perfect beings, and make all things amenable and concordant with all others, as they receive from the gods on high, the causal principles of all these things. So, in this reading, I think we have Iamblichus's very important description of cosmic sympathy. This is a principle that he takes over from Plotinus, but deepens in a completely different way than Plotinus talked about it. Because what Plotinus is basically saying, okay, well there is this interconnectedness of all things, but we can't really tap into it unless we go directly to the one. So this is the theory that all things are interconnected in a hierarchy from the gods to the soul. Daemons are crucial to making the cosmic sympathy work. And later Iamblichus talks about connecting to the higher levels of reality by somehow tapping into the power of the daemons. They bind together, they provide the communion of all things, they implant order into the participation from the gods and receptivity of less perfect beings. So it's this interconnectedness that somehow the daemons are tapped into in basically almost as intermediaries. They are the junction box, if you will, between the higher world and then the lower of matter. And I'm wondering what you got out of this and how that came across to you.
Well, for me, the thing that immediately jumped out, and again, I always bring this up just because it's something that I've done quite a bit of reading on. It's very similar to this concept of Kia in chaos magic, which is sort of this. It's kind of conceived of as like a universal. What's the right word I'm looking for? Like really a universal mind, I think, is the best way to describe it. That like all entities, including human beings and everything intermediate between, the lowest and the highest, they're all a part of. And that's something that I actually see a lot in these sort of esoterically based systems where there has to be this like glue, this glue that holds everything together. Maybe glue isn't the right word because glue doesn't allow you to move through it. But I almost think of it as like a network. Like you see like visualizations of the internet or something. You have like the many pings that kind of connect to one another, and there are those hubs, right, where a lot of those pings are being directed towards. So I see this kind of as a reflection of that. You know what I mean? It's like a map of reality that these daemons create. And I think that it's very cool because it does, like I say, it gives, and this is always my biggest qualm, I guess, with someone like Plotinus or even like, more modern thinkers. But is that there is not that much to direct action at. Whereas I really like this system and systems like it because it does allow you to push towards a definitive energy, I guess. So yeah, that's kind of just my initial thoughts. Love to hear what you guys have to say about it too, though.
Yeah, sorry, do you mind just telling me the page of what you just read?
Yeah, this is the one. If you got the on the mysteries by the interpretation with Dylan, Clark, and Hirschfeld. Yeah, it's on page 24.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Me, yeah. I mean, what I find interesting about this is that it's the ability in some way to be able to tap into these higher realities. It gives us access to those higher realities, which I find interesting because I guess from my personal experience, maybe it has to do with, well, can I just access those realities immediately? And I would want to be able to access them, like without having to go through any type of intermediary. Why do I have to go through the daemons? But I mean, before we even get to that, is there, if you ask yourself, well, is there this type of interconnectedness of all things? How do we see that interconnectedness in real life? Where does it, I mean, do you have specific examples of that? And how does it come across?
Specific examples is tough. Yeah, I'm just gonna send a GIF into the chat to illustrate what I'm talking about a little bit more.
Pardon?
Oh, I just sent just a GIF into the chat to sort of illustrate what I was talking about there.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for that. That's not directly related to your question.
Yeah, I mean, do you have example? I mean, we all experience these things, right? There's a reason we're here, and one is that we've experienced. That I would say, I'm assuming, but it sounds like from previous conversations, have all experienced something, which gives us an inkling that there is something else above and beyond what we experience in our everyday lives. Is that something? Can we generalize and say that something is this interconnectedness that he's talking about, this universal sympathy of all things, or is there some other type of experience that he's talking about that gives him an insight into the fact that there's this interconnectedness? I mean, if I'm a strict materialist, I'm pretty much going to basically laugh at this, right? What do you mean interconnectedness? There's nothing else. If there is an interconnectedness, it's all explainable with physics, the laws of physics, chemistry, whatever. That's the interconnectedness.
Well, from a personal perspective, something that I see, again, like in my own practice, my own experiences, I think I've told you guys before, like I got my start in all of this through like Solomonic magic, which of course is primarily concerned with connecting with demons, in a
Right.
very like Christianized sense, capital D demon, And in my mind, I never really was coming at this from a Christian perspective. So it was always interesting to me to read someone like Agrippa or like any of these Ars Goetia or any of these things that were written a very long time ago that were in that overtly Christian context, right? Whereas like I was receiving similar results not coming from this context. So it suggested to me that therefore there was some there beyond the specific, I guess, ideological frameworks that were being presented, which again does suggest that there are these, I think of them as like hubs for thought and energy that kind of coalesce into, something greater, which allows us.
Sure.
Yeah, which allows us to be connected,
But what brought you to even doing Solomonic magic? I mean, that seems like a big step for anyone to to begin to want to connect with demons, whether they're Christian demons or daemons, as even Iamblichus is talking about here.
Well, I mean, for me, it was psychedelics. I had some experiences with that like suggested to me, and not only experiences while tripping, like while systems or while these things were in my system, but I found that the way I was able to look at things through those substances, they carried on, like I have one very specific intense experience. I don't know if you guys want me to share it, but it was like after, I did some mushrooms, and a couple days later, like, not part of the experience of the psychedelics themselves, I was being contacted very, I would say aggressively, by something outside of myself, and so that just it pushed me into research about these things, and I think that like a lot of people who have that experience might come to something like Solomonic magic first because it's just kind of the most culturally relevant, like the most famous, for lack of a better word. It has the clout online. Yeah, and like I did get results with that. I've gotten better results with different things beyond that. But yeah, like that's where the experience comes for me that like made me kind of lit the fire under me to explore these things, I guess. I don't know if it answers the question exactly, but yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Arjana?
Yeah, I mean, I always like I didn't ever see the significance of the interconnectedness behind the scenes. Like it took me a while to see the interconnectedness of us humans, and I always kind of felt that was to do with the Great Spirit. I'm not sure if Iamblichus describes it in a different way, or if he mentions maybe the heroes is what he would equate with the Great Spirit, the way that I'm understanding it.
Mm.
Then I always kind of thought that that's where the interconnectedness was. That's where the unity is. So even in the realm of the daemons, of the daemons, it would be their Great Spirit because they would all have one. So it's kind of like we all, like I would have to take a few steps back in order to get in touch with the interconnectedness, even if it seemed like a demonic entity, like it has that purpose to kind of get me to where I need to get. But even for that level, it's the Great Spirit that is actually doing the great work. That's how I understood it. And that's why maybe evil doesn't even exist, because really it's this Great Spirit that exists.
Mm.
So that's kind of how it's making any kind of sense in my mind. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. I mean, I think for me, it's been having these overwhelming, not often, but just sometimes having these experiences of saying, okay, well, there's this overwhelming sense of oneness with all things that I used to experience as a child much more than I do now, because my life is so fractured, um, with work and whatever else is going on. But I mean, as a child, I can remember feeling much more at one with everything that was going on around me. So if there's any interconnectedness, I think I can relate it to that sense of oneness with the land, oneness with the spirits that maintain the land. That kind of thing that I I'm getting on in age, but those things start coming back to you, and you start saying, well, was that real? And it does seem to me that they are real, and that I need to begin to understand them more, which is part of what's going on with my continuing research into the occult. I'm trying to, however, place this sense of cosmic sympathy into a personal perspective. And, I think that at one time I had thought that I understood, but now I'm finding, do I really understand it? And I mean, intellectually, I understand where he's coming from. Intellectually, I can understand, okay, well, there is this oneness of all things on this really, really high level. If I begin to get, expand my consciousness, intellectually, I can see it. But I mean, emotionally, can I really feel that oneness? That's a question I guess I find myself asking, and then I ask myself, well, what do daemons have to do with it? What are daemons going to give me that I can't just do myself?
I would say that, again, my experience, like the daimons are what provide the. I always use the word energy. I don't know if that's exactly like the best word to describe what it is that I'm talking about. But those diamonds provide the, I'm just going to use the word energy, in order for that cosmic sympathy to be made manifest, I guess, to exist in reality, or not in reality, in materiality, you know? So again, like I come back to this idea of them as hubs that do not, and I say that drive us. That's actually not the right word to use. They pull us, I think. They pull us into certain, aspects of our own lives.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think that like when you say I, I thought I understand, I don't, and like, and now I'm starting to question that feeling. Like, I think that intuition is really, for me at least, intuition is really important when when I'm doing any sort of practice like this, and like knowing that like this is the path forward, this is provided to me by, well, I conceive of it as provided to me by the daimons, like it creates that feedback loop using your intuition to better connect with the daimon, which then will strengthen your intuition ad infinitum.
Mhm.
So do you think that once like a particular daimon does its thing, like with the energy that it maybe provides, and then maybe does it kind of incorporate with us at some point, like that energy, until we are able to do it, let's just say, or we have incorporated that energy or what we need, and then we move on to the next one. It kind of seems like that's how the connections may happen. I'm not sure. I mean, in my experience, I found like once I've kind of got what I've needed, I can now move on,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. Like it's almost like an overcharging, not overcharging like for money, like overcharging like a phone or something. Once you get up to 100%, you plug it into the next charger, which will get you up to 200%. You know what I mean? Like it. Yeah,
Mhm.
I definitely like trying to use it. I definitely vibe with that.
Yeah, I
To
kind of, like in my experience, it's a little bit like that, like I found.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I'm gonna be honest
See,
with you. I don't know if I've ever got up to 200%, but I've maybe got up to 150 a few times.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, definitely.
well, I can say that, I mean, my, there's supposed to be like a guardian spirit, and that's known as the great daimon in the Neoplatonic tradition. I can say that, again, as a child, I had that awareness of this other spirit that was guiding me or wanted to guide me. And some people call it the conscience. I think people maybe over rationalize it as the conscience, which is telling you, when to do the right thing, when not to do a bad thing. That is part of what the great daimon is. But the great daimon is also an entity which is separate from us and who we are, and that I can feel. I mean, when I brought up began to pursue the occult practices once again, more probably more consciously, more seriously, I had several experiences where I felt the presence of the Grand Daimon, and and the Grand Daimon, just gives me an overwhelming sense of love, gives me an overwhelming sense of care, and I can relate to that. I mean, at times it almost seems like I hear a voice that's
like,
telling
cause
me
like
one thing or another.
I've had similar experiences before, and this is not necessarily related to the text, more about your personal experience, but like, is there ever like fear there for you, or maybe not fear, but like apprehension and awe, like awe, I guess is probably the actual word that I'm talking about, because like I'm thinking about my last like extremely intense experience. This was probably like six. I mean, it started the summer, so like 4 months, 5 months ago. Um, and like, well, it freaked me out to be perfectly honest with you. I was like, this is extremely intense. I don't know if I'm like equipped for it. And
Mm.
for me, that's what makes me think. And again, perhaps it was just like the wrong thing that I was trying to connect with. You know what I mean? But like, I
Mm.
think that the guardian spirit aspect, I don't know, would that elicit that sort of a response? Has it in the past for you
I think
guys? I'm just
so.
interested to know. Yeah.
Well, my recent experience has not been that, but there's a ritual for meeting your guardian spirit, which is in the Picatrix.
Yeah, the Abermelon. I actually just picked it up.
And yes, exactly. Well, the Picatrix is a previous rendition of the Abermelon.
Right.
And the Abermelon's much more complex, I think. The Picatrix is actually pretty simple, although it has its complexities as well. But the upshot of that is that yes, there's supposed to be this overwhelming sense of like terror that overcomes you, all as well as terror. You know that fear and trembling that overcomes you when you actually meet this spirit in its full intensity. I mean, now I'm only hearing, you know, whispers. I'm only hearing hints in my mind that the guardian spirit is watching over me. But were I to really literally meet my guardian daemon, that would be an intensely terrifying experience, I'm sure. Have you ever seen the movie? I hate to bring movies into it, but there's a movie called, now I'm forgetting the name. It's an actual really, really good occult esoteric movie about a woman
Dark
who...
Song.
The Dark Song, yes. Have you
Yeah,
seen
I love
that?
that movie. It's great. That's one of my, in fact, in fiction, that's one of the better depictions of magic
Mm-hmm.
I've seen, like ever on screen. No, that's an excellent movie.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it first.
Yeah, I love that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I mean, like in that, there's that like, you know, climactic scene at the end where she like goes in to see it. There's that like definite like mix of the most beautiful thing in the entire world and this like overwhelming power that just I think is captured very well in that film. Yeah, no, I love that one.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had a lot of terrifying experiences, and I don't know if that was me getting in touch with a great power or really kind of dark thing. I mean, I would say felt like quite a dark thing. So,
Actually,
I
sorry, go
don't
ahead.
know. Yeah, so carry on. I mean, yeah, so I don't know, but it's just like terrifying in a very intense way. Yeah.
Well, actually, I want to then circle this back to our conversations of evil last week. Because, like, again, and especially honestly, when I was like in that Solomonic framework, I had experiences with a lot of things, and one in particular that I would consider like squarely evil, you know, at least in my experience of that thing. But
Yeah.
if we're working in this Iamblichian framework where these entities are sort of hubs of existence and of energy that allow us to ascend, and also knowing that the one encompasses all. That all includes everything. Like that all includes things that we on first sight might consider to be evil. You know what I mean? So like that terrifying feeling, not only that terrifying feeling, but also that like that sense of apprehension, I think, that comes along with it, I think is really interesting to explore, because it allows, I think, us to, and again, if we're looking at these entities through the Neoplatonic framework, you're not accessing evil as much as you're just expanding your horizons of what being can, you know, encompass. And again, I will say, I'm not even sure I'm there yet as a practitioner. You know what I mean? Like, to the point where I'm like, no, these are just different expressions of all. Like, well, I don't know if I'm there yet, but I think that it's something to think about at the very least.
I don't know. I'm willing to go with the Amblicus pretty far, but to deny the fact that there's evil in the world and it's only a deficiency of rationality or reason, I don't agree with. I think there's pure evil.
Yeah, and I have a hard time with that. Yeah,
experienced it. I've actually experienced it where, and it's scared obviously scared the crap out of me. To experience this, and I didn't even have to take any drug. Well, I didn't have to do any type of occult practice or a ritual of any kind to experience it, although I was doing other like drugs and things like that. But this was such an overwhelmingly powerful experience of just the negativity of death and the ultimate death, which would be the extinction of the spirit of the soul, and an aggressive entity that wanted to bring that about. That was very real to me.
Yeah, like I've not really had to do any kind of rituals or anything to be in touch, really. And I think that's what makes it more terrifying, because it's more like a communication that I don't think that I really want, but then I have to embrace because it's my reality. But it can get really hard sometimes because it has such a negative frequency to it that I can sense. So
yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm not sure if that's like a blessing or a curse, to be honest with you. Godspeed, I suppose, Farzana.
Yeah, I wouldn't think.
To me, it's definitely like, yeah, a curse. Like, I wouldn't put it in any other way, but I have to see why. Like, there must be a reason. But I think there are planes. Like, there seems to be levels and planes to it. And as you go through the planes, it's a bit lighter. The quality, you can discern it not to be so heavy or intense in terms of the frequency. There's a difference. So I don't know. Like, I don't really know what to think or make out of it.
I mean, I guess if any of us did, we would be elevated, right?
Yeah, I don't know. What if you're kind of stuck in the lower realms, though? Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes I feel that's a curse. When it feels
well,
like
I mean, for me, again, when I'm like talking about connection with these outside forces, I find it much easier to connect to ones that I would say are more negative than, having those like kernels, those nuggets of gold, where you really are able to like elevate yourself.
Isn't that what the Solomonic tradition is about? Is about contacting those entities and then using them to kind of catapult yourself into the higher realms?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. But I think that a lot of times those entities are wrapped up in they're wrapped up within materiality and like material outcomes, So for me, like when I started this, I was like a left-hand path guy, I wanted to gain power and real world impacts from this. Right. And really, it's actually my experience with those things that drew me away from that, where I was like, I just don't know if I'm like, you have that like, the trope in fiction of like the young magician that's getting too big for his boots, that thinks he understands a lot more, and he ends up going like crazy from contact with these things. And I'm like, I mean, that's the reason why I was like, I don't think that this material view of magic is positive for me. And I think that is what attracts a lot of negative entities. Those things that are tied to materiality, you know. Things about, things about money, things about manipulation, things about even like love, to a like romantic love,
Right.
you know, to a certain degree. Like, and I think that when you start putting yourself in the mindset of that, it does attract those things, which again, like, I think works with Iamblichus's way of thinking, in that, you are taking yourself away from the sympathy of the one when
Well, see,
you
now
exist in
he agrees,
materiality.
though. He agrees, though, right? I mean, we're going to use these daemons. We have to contact these daemons in order to use, lack of a better term, catapult ourselves to be moving into these higher realms, these spiritual realms. So in that sense, the process is similar. It's just that he's saying you can use it not for purely material objectives, but these more, supposedly, quote unquote, more spiritual objectives.
I think it's a little different. Yeah.
Oh,
There you go. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm really late. I think
okay.
I think that you were about to say the same thing I was going to say.
Well, you go ahead. Let's see.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that if you bring the Solomonic tradition into this, you're dealing with two different conceptions of what you're working with. I think that Iamblichus sees the daemons as higher. They're more like what we would think of as angels or something, whereas in the Solomonic tradition, the type of creature that you would browbeat and tell you to make you a lot of money and get you a hot sexy girlfriend or whatever are considered lower than humans, and that's why you have the authority to browbeat them around and tell them to do that, at least in the most famous parts of the Solomonic tradition, which is
I was
mostly
just
working with those
talking
lower
about
demons.
Sure, I was just talking about the process, though. The process of getting a demon to work for you is similar to getting a daimon to work for you, to move to some type of other objective.
In a way, I think it is a little different because I think it's a little different anyway because of the way that it relates to, like, in both cases, the ultimate reason for the authority that you would have to do that thing is because of the whatever the highest divinity is. So in Solomonic magic, it would be God, and in the Platonic theurgy, it would be the One, and or whatever your connection to the divine is, and like the reason why that power would bring that thing to you is different in the two cases. Because, well, actually, this is actually the most interesting part of these chapters to me was. Well, anyway, in the Solomonic side, it's that you are using that power as a weapon. You're saying like, "Hey, I'm closer to God than you are, and I'm going to rain holy retribution on you if you don't do what I say. So, like, get over here and do this thing for me, or else." But in Iamblichus' on his side of things, he's more saying that, like, it seems to me that this answers a question that we had a couple weeks ago of like, why do these things want to work with us? He basically says, because you're so close. You're just so close on your levels of existence. They're just a little bit higher than you. And so you can use that almost like flashing a badge at them and saying like, hey, you like the one, I like the one. Let's get together and talk about it. And they kind of like pull you up little by little from there. And so it's a little bit of a different play of why your authority of being connected to the highest divinity would matter to this other thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Going off that, I was just going to say, like, real quick, if we're looking in the Neoplatonic framework, I see something like Solomonic magic as much more Goetia versus theurgy.
It is, yeah. And this is what Iamblichus is. In a way, that the Goetic is behind what Iamblichus is talking about, right?
Right.
I mean, because he has. I mean, eventually, in the succeeding chapters, he will actually talk about them, say how they're wrong, and give exactly the reasons that we're discussing here about why the Goetic practitioners are trying to coerce the gods instead of doing what he thinks is the right way to do it, which is to open yourself to this higher reality and whatever it is that he thinks is possible for us to come in contact with these daemons. I mean, he's thinking you have to live a virtuous life, You have to live a very religious life. You have to do all of these observances. You know, those things will get you in higher contact with the daemons who will move you on to the higher realms than if you only have these, well, as you're talking about, Ryan, these only materialistic goals in mind.
Just
Hello?
while we're kind of
Oh.
sorry, while we're kind of just on this subject, a little bit of a tangent. Like, where do you think? Because possession, like humans being possessed, has existed throughout the whole of human history, I would say. Where do you think that kind of fits in? Like, what's
Well,
your
I think
opinion?
he's talking about being possessed in a good way, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, in a not so good way. Like,
No,
if it's
yeah.
a good way, yeah, if it's a good way, then that's fine. But if it's like because that's kind of the result that you're looking for. But
Hmm.
in a not so good way, like does anyone have any kind of insight about, just on a bit of a tangent, on that?
I kind of think this is where Iamblichus is not doing a great job. I think that this is kind of the dissatisfaction that a lot of people here were talking about when they were talking about evil. Like,
Yeah.
he seems like he doesn't really have, he just kind of doesn't care to explain why any kind of spiritual entity would be negative towards humans, which
Mm.
is like a weird omission because, like you're saying, it seems like it's a very common trope in any tradition that recognizes that there are spirits. It recognizes that some of them are not going to be good to you.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
I think he just kind of doesn't explain it very well, but I think that I think you could just add it in there. Basically, if you extend his reasoning a little farther, that you have
Okay.
like these things that get more and more differentiated down from the one. That's like, okay, first you have the one, which has totally no divisions inside of it. It's complete and whole, and there's nothing left out because it has no difference inside of it. And then under that, you have the daimons that are like a little bit different, but they're all kind of divine and they all have that in common and it's really solid. And then under that, you have the heroes and they're like a little more differentiated. They have like kind of personalities. They're more like humans. Then you have humans and we're all as different as humans are, but we all have a soul. And so we all have that in common. Sort of like,
Mhm.
if you go, you could just keep going. I don't think there's any reason in his argument why he just doesn't do that, but I don't see why you couldn't just
Well,
keep going and say there are even more like
yeah.
Mhm.
differentiated beings that are even more extreme and wild and they go even more unbalanced and they're so unbalanced that they can harm us and you can just
Well,
kind of keep going.
it's a
Mhm.
philosophical reason for him. I mean, it's the basic Platonic principle that there is no evil. It's all a lack of understanding. It's a lack of knowledge. If
Right,
if
but
if we have the knowledge, then we can understand that anything that we think is fearful is just further lack of knowledge. And the more we have knowledge of that, the less we would fear it.
Right.
right,
I mean, I
but
guess I guess he starts off from a certain level of the hierarchy. And for some reason, I have found this to be across the board. Like, the people that talk about this don't tend to go and explain the lower levels and possession and harm and, you know,
Well,
driving
I
us a
think
bit. Like, I don't
some
find
of
this
it has.
really...
Sorry, go ahead. These
No, no,
these
no,
Discord
carry on.
calls, man. Go ahead.
No, so that's what I like, because I think the whole idea of these kind of books is to help kind of get up the hierarchy, that way you want
Mhm.
to ascend. So to kind of focus any attention on the descend, like continuous descending, is not really part of explaining it. But it would help because there are people that have great difficulty because of the descent being so low. It's lower than the human plane. Like, it goes onto the underworld, right?
Mhm.
And so that would be really helpful, because how are you meant to go up there if you're going downwards or if you're stuck down there? Sorry. Carry on.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna actually say basically that, and based on something that King had said last week, yeah, about like why is that lower level never talked about in, I don't know if the Neoplatonic tradition broadly, but definitely in Iamblichus? And I think some of that does have to do with the fact that by placing humans in an intermediary position, as opposed to on the lowest sense, or on the lowest level, I think it implies what's the word I'm looking for? It implies like it would be easier to ascend, I think. And I don't think that that's like very useful for Iamblichus's project. Like, I don't think that that really works with what he's getting at here. So I can sort of understand why he wouldn't. Also, like, I mean, I'm sure there's an element of, the book's already X amount of pages, and he really wants you as a human to be able to grasp these things, And I think that, like, if looking at it from the perspective of, and I know this isn't the best way to look at the text, but from the perspective of an instruction manual on ascent, I can understand why that other stuff would not be brought up, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, what's really weird? Yeah, go ahead, Freshen.
No, sorry. Like, that does make sense, and that's what I think as well. I just think it's omitted, but it's there. Like,
well, yeah, I don't think that he believes that there are these evil entities, which is really weird because of the Chaldeans, the Chaldean oracles, which definitely, even with the few fragments that we have, talk about evil entities and having to protect yourself from the evil entities. Maybe it's because, like, I think I'm hearing is that the book is meant to put a positive spin on these practices because of the the criticism of Porphyry, but I think it's from the philosophical. He thinks that he's taking these practices from the Hermetics, from the Chaldeans, from the Goids, and he's understanding them with the rationalistic tools that Plato provided and that the Platonic Academy provided. He's somehow purifying them and putting them into their correct perspective, acknowledging their power, acknowledging the fact that we can actually use them contrary to what Porphyry's saying, but acknowledging as well that we have to bring the philosophical framework and the tools that we have of philosophy into the study and into the understanding of the practices. I think that's why he's and he has that Platonic prejudice that there really is no evil per se. It's all a matter of knowledge.
Although it's interesting that this omission would apply to only spiritual beings, because if you believe that evil is not a real force, evil is just an appearance that is caused by ignorance, like you just think there's evil because of your limited perspective, but if you could see the whole picture, you'd realize it's not really evil. Like, that would apply to humans as well. But you wouldn't say humans can't hurt you. Like, you would only say, well, if humans hurt you, maybe there's a bigger purpose behind it that's not evil in the end. But you wouldn't say there's no such thing as a harmful person. Like, you wouldn't, that would be absurd.
Yeah.
So even you can still have this kind of philosophy and say, well, ultimately there's no harmful spirits that are just pure bad, but there are still some that could happen to fuck you up along the way. And like, it's funny that is omitted, but that you would never omit that if you were talking about people.
Yeah.
I would say, and this isn't really related to like the spiritual side of this, but like I think that it's also important to remember the context in which he was writing, and that like he was, you have like the Hermetics, the Chaldeans, like all of these thought strains that are all kind of brewing in the East Roman Empire. But like I also think that he would definitely have been thinking about it in in relation to Christianity, and how, like, I almost, and I don't know if I was like, maybe I'm not using the right term here, but like, perhaps there's an aspect of like marketing, you know what I mean? Where it's like, no, those Christians with all their demons and all of their, negative stuff, that you don't have to worry about that. That's not what you need to be thinking about. What you need to be thinking about is ascent and ascent only. And I actually think it was probably a negative marketing strategy, if we're going to call it that, because that was so prevalent at the time, even like thinkers like Porphyry. Yeah, I think that's also always going to be relevant to think about when looking at any thinker, I guess. But Iamblichus specifically is like, what context was he writing this in?
Yeah, that's
Well,
true.
remember that he was, it was Plotinus who was opposed to the Gnostics. They tried to join his circle, and Plotinus, I don't know if he threw them out, but he made very strong admonitions against them that they should leave. And so there is that kind. I mean, yes, for sure. Iamblichus is aware of that context, and unfortunately, we'll have many of his other writings. So he's not talking about that in this writing per se, because I think he has other bones to pick with Porphyry.
Yeah, he's got other priorities. But yeah.
I mean, he's got to set up, and he I don't know. I guess you could call it marketing. I mean, he's definitely an evangelist of some kind. He wrote his biography of Pythagoras, at least according to John Dillon. He wrote it as basically a counterpoint to the Gospels of Jesus. He's trying to set Pythagoras up as kind of a savior figure.
Right.
So there is context to what he's saying. That he's not talking about evil beings. That's a good point. Let's keep that in mind. But again, I think it goes back just to the Platonic prejudice about there being anything evil per se. So I'm wondering. I mean, hopefully this conversation hasn't reached its end, because I'm still trying to get an emotional handle on this cosmic sympathy and how I can experience that in my life, because I know I have, but at the moment maybe I'm just trying to be too objective about it. But how do I get a handle?
I love this stuff.
In what way?
I think the cosmic sympathy idea is just so cool. I don't know, because it is the explanation du jour for magical effects of all kinds, and this is sort of what the Renaissance magicians especially picked up on. And like Agrippa, if you read the 3 books of occult philosophy, he explains everything this way. And some of the most, it's generally kind of an encyclopedia, that work, or those books are. But in the times where they describe this sort of cosmic sympathy chain of associations, like those are the times when, to me, it becomes kind of more poetic and affecting. And I think Iamblichus describes it very well. I think if you are feeling like it seems too abstract, that could be maybe the result of trying to be too objective and trying to take your experience of things out of the equation. Because I think that this is one place where the direct experience of how you experience, I keep saying the word experience. I think this is one place where the way that you experience the qualities of something becomes important in the moment as you're interacting with the thing. Yeah. I think it's pretty distinctly Platonic. I mean, it's a pretty distinctly Platonic idea too. And this is where this is one of the qualities I appreciate about this work in particular, which is that most of the time, it's not necessarily putting forward completely new ideas about the cosmos or anything. It's trying pretty hard to be very recognizably Platonic. It just applies it in a more imminent way, which I think is helpful.
Yeah, I think he does a great job of trying to give us this awareness of these other realities and the interconnectedness of things. I mean, it makes total sense to me when I don't objectivize it, right? Or to objectify it. I can feel it and I can understand it from a purely emotional way, but intellectually it becomes harder. And I don't think that his framework really works for me, which is that, potency, cause, what is it, and action. Those don't work for me anymore. I mean, I think that whole metaphysics is basically not, it doesn't work anymore. It's just not true if we put it into the perspective of modern science. And I'm just wondering, can we replace it? Do we have anything in modern science that would help us to understand it in a similar way to the way that Iamblichus understands it? Can we give it uh, an anchoring in the real world? Because he believes this stuff is really happening in the real world. He thinks that these levels of cause and effect and potency and activity are, have a whole chain right up to the gods. And if you read, if you read Proclus's work on the theology, the elements of theology, you get a real understanding of what that means, although it's as boring as heck. And I mean, you're going like, okay, well, this has no applicability in my life at all. How do I get an anchor on? So what I'm asking for is I want to be able to have an objective framework within which I can see the interconnectedness of all things. I feel it when I meditate and stuff. I certainly get inklings of it, but do I have anything in the objective world that I can, hang this on in
I
the same
think,
way that he does?
to me, I think there are modern scientific concepts, or models at least, that
Hmm.
are structured similarly to this idea of like essence, potency, and action.
Hmm.
Um, that at least there are two of them that come to mind. One's more mathematical and one's more technological. And maybe I'm misreading, but this is one way that these are what came to mind for me when I was reading about that categorization anyway, which is
Hmm.
that one of the examples is the idea of potential versus kinetic energy, where basically you have some kind of a situation like an object on a shelf, and it's maybe a little precarious. So you have some kind of a situation which is just like the arrangement of the way that things are. Given, like, due to this arrangement, the object on the shelf is said to have a certain amount of potential energy. It could go this fast if it fell off the shelf, even when it's not actively falling off the shelf. And then, say you have a cat, the cat walks along the shelf and pushes the thing off. Now that potential energy is converted into kinetic energy and it's actually falling off the shelf. Um, for me, those three things, the arrangement, the potential energy, and the kinetic energy, are one of the ways that I use to make sense of the whole essence, potency, and
Hmm.
action thing. And then the other example that I think of, which is basically the same setup in a different way, and it's a little antiquated, is a slide projector, where
Hmm.
you have like this setup of a light bulb with a slide in front of it and a screen, but it's not on yet. Like even if it's not on, you just have this arrangement. And then because this arrangement exists, it has, the light has the ability to illuminate the slide and project it, but even when it's not actually doing it. And then when you turn the slide projector on, the light turns on, which causes the slide to illuminate and causes the image to be projected. And that's the action. These kinds of things are intuitive to me, and if this is a proper understanding of those three categories, then those are images that help me understand them. But it's possible that I'm actually just misunderstanding the categories, and so the analogies don't apply. But that's what I.
Well, I mean, they mean something to you that's important. I just wonder how they fit into a higher. Do we call it supernatural? How does it fit into a realm where you have spirits, daemons, heroes that are actually contactable, that I can actually pray to them and somehow commune with them. These daemons, how do I contact them?
Yeah.
Using that model.
So I think we can apply this model, but I think that that's when it has to become experiential. That's what I mean. We have to look at our day to day. Like, I guess, I could start talking about astrology, but that's just as esoteric as all of this. I guess in a more relatable way, it's like if we think about we could think about emotions maybe and say, okay, so for instance, and this is somewhat astrological, I guess, but so for instance, we might say like, and the Greeks would say that if you get angry, that you're like with the daimon of anger, or you're with Mars in some way, or I guess they would say Aries, and I'll say Mars. So if you say, "Oops, I bored him to sleep," but if you say
no.
but if you say like when you're getting angry, right? This is sort of like the virtues of Mars manifesting through your soul as the emotion of anger. You can kind of apply the same model to it, where the potency of Mars is to manifest as anger, but you're not always angry. So sometimes, you might be angry on a Tuesday, and then you might be angry on a Wednesday, and each of those is a separate instance of you being angry. That's a separate action of anger, like manifesting actually in a concrete way. But both times it's the same feeling. It's the same feeling of anger, which is the potency of Mars. And the fact that Mars is the type of thing that can give rise to you being angry in the first place, as it exists in this daimonic world, is like part of its essence, because in order for it to like like this is where it gets kind of strange, but it's sort of like, because it has as its I don't know how to say it. It's sort of like, because it has this essence, that essence manifests for you as you being angry, but not everything in the universe is able to get angry. Nevertheless, it can still be affected by Mars. And so it's like, because Mars has this essence, it has the potency to affect you in this way, and sometimes it actually does. And so you can see this when you have an experience of a certain type of thing. That's like, because its essence has the potency to affect you like that, and when it actually happens, it's acting on you like in that moment. I don't know if that makes any sense, or if I'm just rambling.
Yeah, no, sorry.
No,
Go ahead, fresh runner.
No, just going off of that, that's a little bit of what I've kind of looked into, because it ties in with like healing and the health of a person. Whereas I think in the ancient world they pretty much looked at health and disease in that way that you just described. Like if you had a problem of anger, then you've got a Mars problem basically, and then they'd look for like a similar essence on Earth that you could take like as a herb, and then it would have a lot of Mars quality to it. So then like the theory is if you took it, then it would help to like tame your Mars, kind of restrain it like that. And it's really quite interesting, because then it correlates with the 7 metals of the alchemist, which is for sun is gold, for the moon is silver, Mars is iron. So they would make the salts out of those, and then you could take them like therapeutically, and that would just help to kind of get your Mars back in alignment or in harmony, I guess, with the with the whole, because they used to see disease as an imbalance of one of like as one of the main problems is one of the planets have gotten out of balance, and how the moon is always in correlation with time. So then the moon has an influence on our bodies in relation to time, and in order to keep be synchronized with the different levels or layers of time, you would have to be synchronized with moon, and that would get you in touch with the earth time, and then by virtue of that you'd be connected to the cosmic time, and then you'd be able to enter absolute time. So there's like a hierarchy, but it has to align, and when there's misalignment, that's when things go wrong. So it's a little bit off of what you were talking about,
Hmm.
but in relation to the body and how to keep it healthy and in harmony. So yeah, I
Yeah,
know
I think.
just a little bit about that, which I
Yeah.
find very interesting. Yeah.
And like this is exactly that kind of thinking is what the occultists and magicians in the medieval times and Renaissance took forward
Right.
from
Right.
Platonism. Like I just keep coming back to Agrippa because that's what I'm familiar with, but
Hmm.
that's the way that he talks about all of these things and occult virtues. And I think the idea of occult virtues is another one which speaks to this concept that like these things like metals or herbs can have properties that are occult, that are hidden inside of them. They have these potencies, but we don't know, or most people don't know, how to bring those potencies into action. So there's the essence and there's the potency, but they don't know how to actually get it to do the thing. And to become a magician is to learn what the potencies of everything are. That is, what are the virtues hidden inside of these things that are all around us, and how do you actually get them to act on the world or on people or whatever it is that you're trying to do.
That's interesting
Yeah.
you bring that up. I was dreaming about that the other day, asking Hecate about magic and how it works, and that, believe it or not, that's actually one of the answers that she gave in the dream. Interesting.
Happy
Yeah, and the
to
way
follow on her words.
and
I
the
practice,
way
Huh,
So
Ryan?
that's how I practice. That's my that pretty much perfectly speaks to like my, especially when we're talking about like the more goetic stuff. Like, yeah, no, 100% on board. That's all I want to say.
Mhm.
Didn't have anything to add, but yeah.
Mhm.
like the way that I've learned to use a lot of it is homeopathically with the dynamization. Is they say it releases the spirit or the essence of that thing, of the substance. So then like like if we wanted to get in touch with the essence of iron, of which is the essence of Mars and the quality of it, you'd have to dynamize it to release the spirit, and then that's how you'd take it in potentized form, and then you'd take it orally, and that's how it would have an effect on the body. So I found that to be quite effective. Spagyrics as well, like
Interesting.
gold and on. Yeah.
Just back to your anchor like question. Actually, ironically enough, just this past weekend, I had a friend up to the city he's a biologist. I will preface this by saying he's also a contrarian, and he's always looking for alternative avenues of understanding. Which, hey, so am I. I've got absolutely no problem with this, but I do think it's important to state that. But he was talking about the way bodies project energy.
Mhm.
And he was talking about, and like I have not read these studies. I'm taking his word for it. So again, like take that as you will. But he's talking about how the bodies project energies and how that inducing different states within the body will scientifically, like based on research will produce different energies in the world. And I think that is a good way, for me at least, to think about it. When he said that, I was like, oh, perfect. Okay, cool. I've got some backing to everything that I've been thinking about. Because again, when we're talking about this framework of essence, potence, and action, the essence for me, when looking at it this way, is your own body and the ability of your body to project. The potency is then the different things that induce different energetic reactions in your body. And then the action is how that relates to the world, how you push yourself forward through that. So again, when looked at biologically according to Taylor, he was saying that this implies a greater connection between us because, those energies then interact with one another in the broader world. And by inducing separate energies, you do see real outcomes, not just,
Right.
not just on the material level, but on the cellular level, within your body itself. I don't know if that helps you think about it, if it answers your question, but I just think it's funny that you brought that up, and I was literally just talking about this 2 days ago.
Well, I added a paper about the scientific study of divination in their notes and resources. There has, I think there are real scientists out there trying to really broaden the parameters of what is scientifically understandable and what's not. And I think that they continue to find things which a diehard materialist of the Enlightenment era would laugh at, but they're finding that these things are real, and that they can be measured, they can be studied. Now, what I find in myself is that, I guess I am looking for, some type of anchoring in the scientific worldview, if you will, the scientific way of thinking about these things, although I'm quite happy existing, not knowing, not understanding, saying, okay, well, I may not understand it scientifically, but I can understand it spiritually, I could understand it emotionally, and somewhat intellectually. It makes sense to me because I'm living it, and it is experiential. I've had these things happen to me, they are experiential, and I don't have a scientific explanation for them. And I don't know, but it doesn't matter whether I have a scientific explanation right now for any of this. I'm willing to proceed until I guess I come up against a real head knocker, which just makes me sit down and want to think this through and say, well, wait a minute, does this contradict everything that I've been thinking so far and believing so far?
I'm a big advocate of whatever worksism. I very flippantly always say, that's whenever I tell people, I'm into the occult and, a magician or however you want to describe it. And they're like, okay, so, but what religion are you? And I always say, I'm a whatever worksist,
I see that's like one of the most scientific studies of religious experiences. William James's varieties of religious experience.
Yeah.
He can't explain why it works. All he knows is that it does work. You have these people's lives who changed. You have alcoholics living on Skid Row, at least in his study. They have a religious revelation of one kind or another, and they turn their lives around and they become exemplary citizens. How does that happen? He can't explain it scientifically, but he can say, oh, well, it works. Whatever it is, it's working. That's how it happens.
Well, I mean, I
So,
think that just kind of like reinforces the ineffability, oh my God, of the one, of the divine.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's meant to be. Like, I don't know if you're supposed to be able to answer why it works.
it does
Though
seem
it is
like
frustrating.
that. Yeah. Well, I think I have two ways to go with this, and I don't know which one to do first. I think I'm going to go with the the less on topic one first, so that we can end with a segue back into the book. So, the first thing I'm going to say is, I think one thing that's really interesting about that kind of like varieties of religious experience type report, which, by the way, I still need to read. Everything I've heard from William James has been amazing, and I haven't ever actually read any of his books, and that's the famous one, so I need to look at that. Anyway, the what's interesting about that kind of a story, that there was this person and they were sort of living in this way, then they had a big aha moment, religious experience that had these kinds of characteristics that was numinous and whatever, and after that they turned their life around. This is the kind of thing that we're seeing now in psychedelics research. It's almost like psychedelics are a substitute religious experience for a lot of people, or a shortcut into religious experience that is induced by means other than a spiritual practice, or at least in addition to a spiritual practice. So I think that's pretty interesting, and I think if you want to talk about things with potency, we could talk about psychedelics. And, they have that mushroom has that potency sitting there on the ground, but it's not until you take it that the potency turns into an action. Anyway, so I think that's the first thing that's interesting. Is when we talk about, when we talk about these spiritual experiences and how to induce them, and how that looks today in a more materialist framework. What are the popular methods for doing it?
Yeah.
The second thing I'm going to say is I think that the slipperiness of all this kind of thing plugs back into one of the first sort of admonishments that Iamblichus gave in the earlier chapters, where he was like, don't think that you can reason this out the same way you reason out other things. Don't think that you can draw a bunch of distinctions and say, well, this is this and that is that, and these are separate, and here's how this one goes to that one, because that type of thinking just stops working once you reach a certain level of completeness, because all those distinctions that you can make, those are only conditions, and once you start thinking about what's not subject to these conditions and whims, and what's above that, it falls apart. And I think that's a big reason why it's so slippery.
And yet he's the one pulling in essence, potency, and action, right?
Yeah, but at the same time,
if it doesn't make if it doesn't mean anything, then why is he bringing it in? Yeah.
At the same time, he does say, in chapter, the end of, well, sort of in the middle of chapter 5, do not, by the way, take this division as characterizing exclusively potencies or activities or essence, nor consider it in a compartmentalized way as concerning one of these aspects alone. But if you see it rather as extending throughout all of them, you will attain the perfect response to your enquiry as to the distinctive properties of gods and daemons and heroes, as well as those in souls. So he kind of makes it, and then he's like, yeah, but it's all kind of fake, though.
Well, okay. Maybe we can come back to that. The metaphysics is distracting to me. It really distracts from whatever, some really, really great stuff that he talks about. But anyway.
Yeah, to me, that's more of the Platonic prejudice than anything to do with good or evil. The Platonic prejudice is now everything has to be metaphysics with a...
Yeah. Sorry, Ryan, you're going to say something.
I was just going to say, like, bringing it back to my very first point that I made in this conversation, I check out the Book of Pleasure, I believe it's called, the Book of something.
The Book of Pleasure by Spare.
Yes, by Spare, exactly. Yeah, and
What's
like it's called the Book
Osmond
of Pleasure.
Spare.
Yes.
Yeah, Osmond Spare. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And like this concept of Kia within it, I think that it really helps bridge the gap because it is both all and multiplicity wrapped up within our own personal experience. Like it's a very important aspect of like it is consciousness and our own consciousness of materiality and how that relates to like the broader picture. It's been a while since I've read the work, to be honest with you, but like it's a concept that I always come back to, and I always come back to it when, or I've been coming back a lot more in this reading of Iamblichus and being like, I see the Kia within it, even though I think that term is kind of silly. But
Interesting.
Yeah, it makes me think
yeah,
about
like
a car.
Sorry, what's that, Kate?
I was just saying it makes me think of a car.
Of what? Oh, car.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. But like, yeah, maybe like I don't know if you're looking for that sort of like more tactile connection to the sort of sympathetic. Perhaps that's a place for you to look.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite occult works of all time. He
Really?
takes some pot shots at Aleister Crowley too, which are pretty funny. But
Yeah.
it's written in a completely incomprehensible way. I had to go through and like translate a lot of it into normal English to be able to understand. But I think that part of the strange sort of manic writing style is part of the experience of reading it. So,
Well, now he was a ritual. Wasn't he a ritual magician?
he was and he wasn't. So actually, the pot shots he takes at Aleister Crowley have to do with their different conceptions of what a ritual is and what it's for. Spare was much more like Spare, like Crowley was more like, okay, we're going to set up this ritual with all of its symbolic connections, and we're going to write it all out, and we're going to, create this structure very intentionally, and it's going to have multiple witty layers of reference and allusion, ha ha ha, and then we're going to do it, and we're going to execute it perfectly. And Spare was more like, he was into automatic writing and automatic drawing and things, and so for him it was more like free association rather than a conscious association. He was more like, I'm going to go in with a loose idea of what I want, but I don't know how I'm going to get there, and we're going to see what happens. And so he criticized the lack of spontaneity, I think, in a lot of other ritual magicians' practices, but in a very
Go ahead.
No,
that's it.
Go.
He just does it in a very I don't even know how to say it.
Incomprehensible. Oh, okay.
Well, I think that it's really important, like when we're talking about Spare specifically, like he was an artist. That was his profession. And like I think that when you look at someone like Crowley, or even like Iamblichus, really, you have this sort of like philosophic pseudoscience, not pseudoscience in the modern context, but like pseudo-scientific vision of magic and divinity and ascension and all these things. But with someone like Spare, it's like it is an art. It can't be described as in the same way that like someone like Crowley would have. Yeah, so like I would definitely recommend it. Checking out some of his works.